Welcome back, everybody. Our next guest tonight is another wealth of knowledge. He has more than a decade of experience on Capitol Hill working on budgeting appropriations, entitlement reform, and tax policy. Now he's leading the Heritage Foundation's Grover Herman M. Center for the Federal Budget as director. He's Matthew Dickerson, and he joins us right now. Matthew, great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, John.
It is an amazing time that we live in. And I want to focus on a fact that a lot of Americans don't know. At the end of 2022, this number came out. America had nearly $5 trillion in tax revenue. I mean, the government had $5 trillion it could spend without ever going into debt. And somehow we spilt another trillion plus in debt. How do we get to this point where we have really successful revenue growth and we still are in debt?
That's exactly the situation. We've collected more revenue this year than we ever have in our nation's history. And part of that is due to the successful tax cuts that we had under the Trump presidency, right? Which set us up for a good situation for economic growth, even going into the pandemic economic downturn that we had. But the reason we have such high deficits, $1 trillion this year and forever going forward, is because the government is spending too much. President Biden has gone on a massive spending binge, more spending than we ever have seen in our nation's history. And it's putting us on a path where we can't afford it, and it's hurting the American economy. And the American people are feeling it in their pocketbooks with levels of inflation that we haven't seen in 4 decades.
Yeah, and there's no doubt. I mean, you've studied this a long time, and of course, you're on the Hill. You watch this dynamic. You throw a lot more government cash on the street, inflation automatically grows, doesn't it?
That's exactly right. Since the start of the pandemic, the federal government has spent more than $7 trillion. And that's been financed by the Federal Reserve. It's all deficit spending. The Federal Reserve has purchased up more than half of the new debt that's been issued by the government since the start of the pandemic using their printing presses. And so that's putting more money into the economy. Biden's regulations and bad economic policies are making it harder for the American people to get ahead. And we got to change course here in the next Congress.
So Democrats are taking one last crack before they hand over the House, which obviously controls the purse strings in Congress. The omnibus bill is got chock full of all sorts of, well, additional spending. Tell us about some of the things that most trouble you.
That's exactly right. Before Pelosi goes out of office, she's stepping down as Speaker. She was voted out of office by the American people, and they want to have one last spending binge, and they want to write the spending bills for next year, when the American people specifically said that the House Republicans should be the ones with the pen. And so they're trying to load it up with all sorts of extra spending, earmarks for all sorts of left-wing crazy policy ideas that the American people would reject. And the scary thing is this bill, when you add it all up, it could rival the size of Biden's American Rescue Plan Act, which was the match that lit the inflationary fire at the beginning of the Biden presidency.
God, it's mind-boggling to think that we would do it and bookend it this way. As you dig in, one of the great things that Heritage has done is started to create a blueprint. When Republicans take over in January, there's a blueprint to begin shrinking discretionary spending. Tell us some of the ingredients that Heritage has come up with to responsibly start to shrink the spending.
That's exactly right. My colleagues and I have put together the Heritage Foundation Budget Blueprint for 2023. And your watchers can find that at heritage.org/budget. And it's got more than 200 specific policy options for the next Congress to take advantage of and put into place in their next budget in their spending bills. So we take a look at the major spending bill, the major spending programs that are the drivers of our deficit. How can we improve programs like Medicare so it doesn't go insolvent by 2028? How can we improve Social Security so it doesn't go insolvent by 2034 if we do nothing? We should reform our welfare programs so that they have the right incentives, so that they promote things like getting back into the workforce rather than people becoming dependent on government. And then we should get rid of some of the totally unrelated things that the federal government shouldn't be doing in the first place that are totally crazy. Like we spend more than $40 million on DC's Opera House. We should get rid of that funding. That should be a total no-brainer.
Yeah, I bet there are so many of those, and they add up into big dollars. You know, 10 million here, 30 million there. All of a sudden, it adds up to big money. You were on Capitol Hill for a long time. You know the mentality. 2016, 17, 18, there was a chance for Republicans. They really didn't shrink much. The group that's coming in now, we've had a lot of the lawmakers on our show here in the last few weeks. They seem really resolved to making this sort of fundamental spending changes that really have been kicked down the road for a decade or more. You talked to a lot of folks on Capitol Hill. What's your sense of the pulse? What's their mindset right now going into 2023?
Yeah, I think the new House Republican class, I think that they're really fired up to do the right things. The wave that we're seeing coming into office in the House reminds me a lot of the Tea Party wave that we saw in the 2010 elections going into 2011. And when House Republicans had the House and they were dealing with the Obama White House and the Harry Reid Senate, they fought. And we had a lot of really good successes on fiscal issues in 2011, right? Where they took advantage of their policy-making leverage points, dealing with government funding bills and dealing with the debt limit. And they got President Obama to sign in to law spending cuts, both in the first government funding bill and with the Budget Control Act that helped save trillions of dollars over the last decade. And so the next Congress is going to have to do that. And I think that there's some really great leaders in the House of Representatives that are going to really fight on this. People like Andy Biggs and Scott Perry and Kevin Hern, who's the incoming chair of the Republican Study Committee. I think they're going to do a really good job in pushing their colleagues to do the right thing and cut spending and deal with inflation.
Yeah, they're all talking in the same way. You could tell that they have a common goal. They know how they want to attack this. We got about 45 seconds left. There's a chance early on to take a vote. It's symbolic in one respect. It's impactful in another. 87,000 new IRS agents find it next year. Do Republicans get rid of that? They
have to. And the way you do that is take advantage of your leverage points in the funding bill, right? So there's no reason they've got a $80 billion slush fund for the IRS. There's no reason to give even more money to the IRS going into the next year. So take advantage, use the power of the purse, defund that slush fund for the IRS.
Yeah, so important. Matthew, real quickly, all this great work that you did in the budget plan, how do people get to it?
Check it out at heritage.org/budget.
That's pretty easy to remember, folks. Go check it out. It's an amazing plan, heritage.org/budget. Matthew, great to talk to you. Thanks to catch up. We're going to be watching all these issues really closely. All right, folks, don't go anywhere. We're going to take a quick commercial break. When we come back, we've got conversations with Florida's Chief Financial Officer. He's doing some pretty remarkable stuff to get rid of woke investments in state budgets. We'll talk about that right after the commercial break.
Hey, I'm Brian. My pronouns are he, his, him. I understand you're looking for a small business loan, but you're having troubles with your ESG score.
I was denied.
What's your business?
I operate drilling equipment, oil and gas.
Uh-huh. The E in ESG is for environmental. You're in a dirty industry.
So I can't get no loan?
Well, let's take a look at your company's social policies. Tell me about your plan to create social justice.
Social justice.
Do your employees get paid time off for abortions? And tell me about your diversity, equity, and inclusion plan.
Well, I ain't got none of that. I'm a driller. I just hire good people to do the work.
Well, maybe there's one more thing we can check. Do you have any female co-owners?
No, just me.
Ooh, have you ever identified as a woman? Or even just non-binary? It could really help your score.
What?
Your loan is denied. Come back when you fix your ESG score.